Is Brian Gutekunst's seat starting to get hot? There may be a fire burning. Why is this season critical for Goody? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I've been wanting this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Okay. Hey. Yeah. Ain't no errors, baby. It's a new era. I wake up early, feeling rich like I'm Kesha.
Welcome in another episode of Sounds Gouda. Thank you for coming back and taking a listen to us. I am one of your two co-hosts. My name is Rob Ralph. Next to me, as always, is my best friend, Jordan Olson. If you did not know, we have episodes every Wednesday and Saturday on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Please make sure to be able to give us a like and sub and follow us on those platforms. Just know we are trying to get to 600 subscribers. Anybody who's subbed to us so far, we definitely appreciate that. If you are listening, make sure if you are listening on other Spotify or an Apple too, come on over and check us out on YouTube. You can give us a sub and like us on there too as well. So on today's episode, we are going to be talking a little bit more in depth on Brian Gutekunst, and this might kind of seem like we're bashing him, but that's totally not the case, or at least we're not going to try to be. But there's both sides to this coin too for Brian Gutekunst. So as much as there is optimism and praise for a lot of the good things that he has done and had for the continuation for the Green Bay Packers, there's also a lot of things that you can continue to evolve and get better at, right? Or as at the pessimism side of that. But for 6 years, Brian Gutekunst, has asked Packers fans for patience. He's promised a plan and he's built methodically. Now the bill comes due, and in Green Bay, the only currency accepted is championships. So Jordan, how can we get back to winning championship football?
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to this episode, and I'll start too. Like you said, this isn't a bash Goody episode. I defend Goody a lot with family or other Packers fans because there's a lot of good things that this man has done, right? But I think the point of this episode is that he said it himself. The window is now. He started having that conversation really last year in the 2024 season, but he's put a lot of pressure on himself. And there's a lot of things that we'll talk about here that have alluded to that. And then, we'll maybe talk a little bit about some process things and some question marks we might have. But yeah, I think, like you said, Rob, if we don't win a championship or, at very least, make a strong appearance into an NFC championship game where it looks like we are at the cusp, who knows? The Packers as an organization typically don't do rash things and value long-term success. So, not necessarily saying if he doesn't reach the Super Bowl in the next few seasons that he will be fired, but I think the fans, will certainly be critical of some things that he has or has not done over the last couple seasons in particular, right? So, first and foremost, you have the Jordan Love of it all, right? And back in 2020, for better or worse, he married himself to Jordan Love, and that succession plan to Aaron Rodgers. He doubled down. We gave Jordan Love this contract extension. He's one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. And, on Twitter and, media, everything, there's a lot of conversation about who Jordan Love really is. Is he a top 5 guy? I know a lot of people will point to the advanced metrics last year, even with his injuries and some of his more traditional statistics, right? It seemed like he was down. But, by advanced metrics, safely a top 10, quarterback last year. So, we know that we need Jordan Love to be healthy, and he needs to perform at a very high level over the next couple seasons here. And, he's not going to be Aaron Rodgers. We've been extremely spoiled with Brett Favre, with Aaron Rodgers, and, the quarterback situation we've had for the last 30 years. So, that situation alone, without diving too much into it, puts a lot of pressure on Goody, on Matt LaFleur, on Jordan Love, and this organization's next few years. So, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit about his draft history. I think this is some of the other big critical points on Goody. Say what you want to him, about his 3rd round picks, but he hasn't exactly crushed his 1st round picks either. And, I know the hit rate is only still 55, 60%, something like that. I'm kind of going off the cuff because I don't have the exact statistic of guys drafted in the first round, but here's a list of the guys that he's drafted since he took over as GM, right? We have Jair Alexander was his first round selection, and while he's been a Pro Bowl caliber player, lived up to that first round billing. We know all the things that come along with Jair Alexander, so I'm not really going to take the injury portion of that into consideration a little bit later. If he's on this roster this year and healthy, that will be really great. But the next year, he drafts for Rashawn Gary and Darnell Savage. Darnell Savage is no longer on this roster, and after a really great rookie season, really struggled to find his footing in Green Bay. Rashawn Gary is the perpetual there's hope at the end, or light at the end of this tunnel, that he's going to turn into a 12, 13 sack guy. And he is coming off of kind of a weak Pro Bowl season. I think his name got him that position more than anything, but there's more to give from Rashawn Gary as well. Talked about Jordan Love. Eric Stokes followed Jordan Love as his next first round selection. We know the story there. Eric Stokes is no longer a Green Bay Packer as well. And who knows, maybe his knee injury really curtailed his career, but that hasn't worked out well. So getting to guys who are still on the roster, we double dipped with Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt. Devontae Wyatt just got his 5th-year extension picked up. And Quay Walker, they have verbally committed to him, but obviously there's desire left with both of those players to become the quality of players you expect from a first round selection. LVN is a massive storyline with Packers fans, and our need for pass rush is dire. So we really need Lucas Van Ness to step up and live up to that 13th overall selection. And then we've got Jordan Morgan and Matthew Golden, right? And Jordan basically redshirted all of last season. He's tabbed maybe right now as the future left tackle, at worst case, a starting guard in this offense for the foreseeable future, but we need to see that happen on the field. So not really going to make much distinction there. And then there's a lot of hype around Matthew Golden. I hope people temper their expectations. But we'll see what Matthew Golden brings. But not exactly a sparkling list of first round selections. You'd think you picked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guys. You would hope that like half of those guys would be Pro Bowlers, guys who would receive 2 full contracts, play 10 years in a Packers uniform or more. That has not been the case. He really needs the likes of Quay Walker, Devontae Wyatt, Lucas Van Ness, Jordan Morgan, and Matthew Golden to really perform at a high level over the next few years, to not undergo massive criticism for missing on those picks.
Yeah. So, and along with that though too as well, right? Like we're talking about the draft, but some other draft history issues as well. So other second round picks, including on top of that, but Josh Jackson. I will thoroughly admit that I was all on top of the Josh Jackson train. I think a lot of people were. Played pretty good when he was at Iowa. Josh Myers will forever be the small hands, wide Creed Humphrey pick.
We have just picked Creed.
Yeah. We'd be in really, really good shape right now if that were the case.
Mm-hmm.
AJ Dillon, I think, had a decent half a year that 1 year. Obviously remember his really good game in the snow at Lambeau against the Titans, I believe it was. That really showcased probably his best game. 3rd round picks too, just to stamp on that though too as well. Oren Burks, he ended up going to Philadelphia, right? Bounced around a little bit, ended up playing in Philadelphia, and ended up being pretty darn good. Sternberger, Josiah DeGuara, Amari Rogers, and Hopper, Tyron Hopper. Obviously the case is still out for Hopper. That's still, pretty early too. But there is an opinion also too on Goody, and I think everybody would probably share this, but to draft and develop, he's too conservative. He loves his draft picks too much. Doesn't make the splashy moves. This year for sure, I totally see how that's justifiable this year. I think we all understand that, but you look at last year and that's definitely not the case. So I'm swinging from pessimism to optimism. And obviously our 2 biggest additions, which kind of makes you feel like, why doesn't he just do that more often? You're not going to hit those home runs every time, but Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs, the two best players arguably on our team last year for sure. So there's just a little bit, and I get it. I always look at like Howie Roseman and how he's done, right? Because in the past decade, they've won a couple of Super Bowls, right? I think that he probably got a little bit lucky with the Nick Foles coming in, injured for Carson Wentz and just ended up taking that really hot team. But either way, I think like if you're alluding this to another GM or a GM that I'd put probably a little bit more ahead of Brian Gutekunst, because the Super Bowls obviously and the facts are of the matter, but he makes very good calculated risks and swings. AJ Brown, Mekhi Becton. He's drafted really well too. I think he's done a good job of drafting position of need and then getting tremendous value too as well. So there's some criticism of that, including what he does and does not do, and the Packers' kind of history and tradition of how they've operated over the years, stemming into a lot of this conversation. Now we'll see with this year, right? Like Jordan, I'm going to give you back the floor, but this year they took a completely different route in the draft, so we'll have to see how that works out.
Yeah, it's just if you're doing GM and coach comparison, right? Like I kind of think the 49ers are a very interesting case study right now. The 49ers kind of put all their chips into the basket for a couple years there, right? And were arguably the best team in the NFC or football maybe. They obviously didn't win the Super Bowl. But now what do they have to show for it? They tore it all down. Analysts are picking them to finish last in their division now. And, I don't think that's a place the Packers want to be living, right? So you can say what you want about Goody, but in the Packers' history of how they operate, but they know the fan base.
Success.
They want a winner, and it is a whole lot more enjoyable to show up to Lambeau and watch a 10, 11, 12, 13 win season than we've been pretty spoiled. We've had a few 4-win, 6-win, 7-win seasons in there, and those aren't very fun seasons to be a part of. But the way that they've handled business has typically allowed them to bounce back that next year and be in contention or be above 500 team, a 10-win team or better. So, just talking about this off season too, I think this off season is a very interesting kind of thing, in what he's done. He had an opportunity, right, to maybe go out and sign one of those bigger name corners, or I wasn't really a huge fan of the edge market, so I'm not really like mad that he didn't really do that. But I think corner seemed like an obvious position, unless of course this whole Jair Alexander thing was a charade anyways and they plan to have him back, but they keep that stuff pretty close to the vest. But that whole situation, as it's been discussed many times, is just weird. Even the way that Goody talks about it is weird. It's very non-committal, and well, he's on this team right now, and just like very GM speak for like, if somebody called me tomorrow with the right offer, or like he'd be on another roster. So I think the corner position too received a lot of scrutiny last year after Alexander kind of wasn't able to play and we didn't really have the depth there. Now we did add Hobbs, and I think he wasn't the player that we expected to add. And I do have some high hopes that Hobbs can be a player, maybe not Xavier McKinney, maybe not a Pro Bowler, but a guy that lives up to his $12 million a year and can be a starter for us. Then you look to this draft, and the draft also has some interesting questions, because you see things for now, but you really see a lot of things for next year. It was a lot of roster building for 2026. They draft Anthony Belton, 2 wide receivers. It's kind of business as normal, right? Like we know we have holes to fill next year. Like the roster's in a pretty good shape right now. So we're going to do that. We like guys to be in a system for a year before they're forced to start, because that's never really a good position regardless of what position those guys are playing. But they easily could have went ahead in the second round and addressed that corner position by taking a guy like Trey Amos, or bolstering the edge group, and with more certainty by drafting a guy like Landon Jackson. I have very high hopes for Baron Sorrell. But you're kind of lucky to have gotten a guy like him in the 4th round. And the fact that he didn't just go ahead and say, hey, we need to address corner, edge, and make sure that that is not a weakness, or we have a guy that can make an impact right now this season and next season. It might be like the Edrin Cooper trajectory, right? Where maybe the first 8 games they're really getting their feet wet, but in the back half of the season they're really showing out. So I just think how the offseason was handled has raised a few eyebrows as well, especially since we're declaring that the time is now to get back to the Super Bowl. So and as a result, I think that's why some of these questions are going to be raised if the Packers don't make it a little bit farther in the playoffs this year than we did last year. You know what, Rob, like you mentioned a little bit of this, but he has done some really good things in his time as a GM. And I don't know if you want to hit on a couple of those things. You know, I might have a few other things to add, but
Yeah. Recent drafts, 2022 to 2024, 2025 is to be determined. We believe Jordan Love, right, is going to end up being good. So him and the Packers putting all their chips in for Jordan Love, we do believe is going to be good. Free agency, Zadarius Smith, the Smith brothers, right? That was really good. Adrian Amos, Preston Smith, Billy Turner, Devondre Campbell for the year, the good year that we got him. Stealing and picking up Rasul Douglas was just a savvy move. Keyshawn Nixon, obviously Xavier McKinney, Josh Jacobs, and then one other one too on here. Last year, and if it weren't for him picking up Malik Willis, right? Like Malik Willis in this, and if he didn't do what he did, I don't know if we would have made the playoffs, right? We just stuck in there as that wild card or that 7th seed. So as much as we on here too, for giving pessimism, there's a lot of great things on here that he's done well. So Banks and Hobbs from this year, that's TBD. So we'll have to end up seeing about that. Our continued history and success of our undrafted free agents. That is all the undrafted free agents in the league know, if you actually do want to get a shot, and they'll really give you a shot, everybody knows that Green Bay's top on that list. So that's something that's great. That's working in the Packers. Ways of doing things. Handling the Rodgers saga, right? Like just wasn't too much drama. Like it just was. It was for the most part. It was very smooth sailing. You could have argued that we could have given Rodgers more weapons, or maybe a Matthew Golden, our first round wide receiver, but that's in the past and what we did there too. And I thought we handled that pretty well. But for him, currently his record is 73-42-1. So 3 division titles, 2 NFC championship games. To me, really, and I'm kind of curious to throw this back to you and get your take. I think I have 3 solid things, and I think most people will be like, yeah, duh. But for Brian Gutekunst to actually be successful and continue evolving and getting better and becoming a great, not a good GM, but a great GM. So obviously that would include winning Super Bowls, but the Jordan Love's got to work out. So this next year is obviously going to be crucial for that. They put all the chips on the table for that. He's got to hit better, right, on some more draft picks. So I don't know exactly what the hit rate is, but like you were just talking on the first round picks, if he hits 5 out of 10, that's 50%. 4 out of 10, whatever, that he's got to hit more on those clips for that top round type of draft investment and capital. And then continue making, this is my third and last one, continue making good and timely free agent swings, similar to Xavier McKinney, Josh Jacobs, the Smith brothers, etc. So, what do you think Brian's got to do to continue to build in his legacy in Green Bay?
Well, that's a great question, and I think we may have started to see him do it a little bit more this draft, right? Like we talked about it previously, but he went out and he drafted some players that the Packers usually maybe just kind of cross off their list. He's too short, he's too light, he's like a tweener at that position. So, I mean, the consensus is if you really put on all those guys' tape, right? Like they all have good tape at the, levels they played at, positions they played at. So, overall, good football players, right? So, like, I think there is been an evolution in his drafts. His first 4 drafts, weren't that great, really. There was a couple great players in there, but I've seen, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we saw the shift where they really moved to this model of drafting their top 30 guys, the Senior Bowl guys. So it's almost like, in my opinion, they've used their evaluation and they know the evaluation process that goes into the Senior Bowl. And it's like, yeah, if we think that they're a hit and they're getting a chance with the Senior Bowl, we go down there, we meet them. That kind of like confirms our feelings around that rather than just like, this is our board and we're going to stick to our board, right? So I feel like they've modified their way to select some of these guys, and all those Senior Bowl guys that we've drafted over the last couple of years have been a big hit. Whether it's a guy drafted in the second round or the sixth round, they usually make the roster and they usually have some kind of meaningful impact, kind of according to what their draft position is or expectations, right? So I think that if he continues to evolve in his draft and evaluation process and hit on a few more of those guys, I think that's a great point, Rob. And it's been highlighted on other shows, but the Packers, when they do take free agency swings, they have one of the best in like the NFL scouting programs out there, right? And they find guys that fit, they find guys that are entering their prime. That's why I have a lot of hopes for Banks and Hobbs. You look at Zadarius Smith, and he very much was in that profile, right, of somebody that's like coming off of one great season,
He was
kind of
ascending.
an unheralded guy, and you weren't really like, man, you're like, you gave that player that contract, right? Like, you're crazy. And if you take away like all the Zadarius Smith stuff that became Zadarius Smith's like personality and all those deals. It was a tremendous find in free agency. And Campbell too, right? You can say what you want about Campbell, but we brought him in off of the scrap heap and turned him into an all-pro. So he kind of positioned himself out of Green Bay, but that was a find. It was a gem. So, keep doing that stuff. So we have a couple hypothetical questions for you. We're probably going to explore some of these topics later on in the off season, but as we close out the show, I just want you to explore what your opinion would be in thinking about these questions. So, what will your opinion be of Goody if Jordan Love is a bottom half of the league quarterback this season? Interesting to think about. You probably already have some thoughts around there. What would your opinion of Goody be if LVN is a bust and the Packers didn't do anything more meaningful to address the pass rush in 2025? What if Golden does not live up to expectations and Dobbs and Wicks never really step up this year? So, if Alexander's back on this team and he holds out of games again due to his injury, and the Packers essentially gave him a second chance and kind of left us with just Nixon, Hobbs, and Valentine as our primary cornerbacks on the roster, how will you feel about Goody, right? And kind of the last one is, if the Packers have another 11 or 12 win season and lose in the wild card weekend again. And now I will say, like, it is going to be tough to ask the Packers to go out and win 13 or 14 games in this division. It's just, we have to be super mindful that we are going to be playing in the toughest division. And even the hapless Bears have gotten significantly better. We'll see if that materializes. But if we have another first round playoff exit, how are you going to be feeling about Goody at that point in time? And these are tough questions to ask. But with that being said, I'm a believer in Goody. I think Rob is too. And, we hope you enjoy the exploration on that. I don't know, you got any other closing thoughts on this Brian Gutekunst conversation before we end this episode, Rob?
I just want to the fans that say that Goody is trash. He's the worst GM. I won't. I've already had some conversation or some engagement with some, and I get it. It's the internet, right? You're gonna dump to the black hole, but really, really dive in down here into the facts, the information, and then weigh the pros and the cons. I just don't think it's as easy as he's the worst GM or he's the best GM. It's subjective. I get it, and it's opinionated. You can weigh one way or the other, but For our money and for what the Packers and the continued success that we've had, I really do feel Goody is a top 10, top 5 GM in this league. And I would ask you then, okay, if you don't want Goody at the helm, who else are you going to take? Howie Roseman? Yeah, probably. Who's the Kansas City's GM? Veach? He's pretty darn good, right? They've been drafting really well. So anyway, that's my point, right? Like, weigh this into consideration, kind of look at the pros and cons, and realize some of the stuff that we're asking here, and pointing out. Goody's a very good GM. There's always room for improvement. That's always going to be the case from year to year in a win now type of league. So.
Absolutely. Well said. I agree with that. There's not, if you really start looking at the guys who have had success in the last 5 years, and then, even just looking at what their, future looks like right now, there's not too many guys you could honestly say that you would take ahead of Brian Gutekunst at this point in time. So that's all we got for you guys. More great Packers content from Sounds Good every Wednesday and Saturday. Thanks for listening. As always, share this with your family, friends, other Packers fans. If you're watching on YouTube, again, please help us out. Hit that subscribe button. But more than anything, we love your comments, the interaction. Our last episode, we had a little snafu, and people called us on that, but it led to some really good conversation, and we're human. This is a side hustle, but we like the interaction. So, let us know what you think. So connect with us on X. Rob's at Sounds Gouda with 3 A's, and I'm at Olson Jord. But until next time, Packers Nation, have a Gouda morning, a Gouda afternoon, and a Gouda night. Go Packo.
Pack.
Been wanted this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Okay. Hey.